Ember Witch. Book 1. The Lich. Volume 1. Black Tragedy. Chapter 2. The Nightmare Begins. September 8, 457 to October 17, 458 BME. Fragment 5. The Page in the Book. It had been only 2 weeks since her birthday and Lilith had finished the first book she got. She wanted to savor them as long as she could, so instead of rushing through the second, she had decided to wait another week to start reading. That didn't mean she couldn't cheat a little and read only a page as she was doing now. However, the moment she had picked up the book, she noticed something off about it. An out-of-place page had slipped from the back of the book and folded over the pages. Curious to know if it had torn out of the book at some point, she flipped to the last page. The instant she set her eyes on the paper, she knew it wasn't even a part of the book to begin with. Instead of a clean print like the other pages, a crude handwritten script was scrawled across the paper in frantic fashion. She examined it for some time before she pulled it out and closed the book quickly so as to not spoil anything for herself. She flipped the page over to the back side and saw more crude writing. After a moment of studying the page, she read the first few words of it. The Queen of the Moon sits on a throne of lightning, it read. Then under that a strange symbol, a star within a large circle, surrounded by 4 symbols she couldn't make out as letters. Lilith flipped over the page once more and began reading again. The ever-growing black is the only existence after death, with another set of symbols she couldn't make out under each word. Lilith shrugged and opened the back of the book, folding the page in half, then placed it neatly inside the book, closing it.
Must be someone's diary or something,
she thought, placing the book down on the floor and sliding it under the bed. She blew out the candle and fell asleep soon after.
Do you have the blade?
Yes.
Do you have the Child of Black?
Yes.
Place them on the stones together and let the water cleanse the flesh and metal.
A black mist fogged over a small river. A small body lay upon a large stone, water rushing over both. Red streaks bled down the water's flow, and a face of pale skin flashed into view. Lilith sat up in bed, sweat collected on her body. She looked around the room, seeing a glimpse of sunlight peeking through the window, and sighed.
It was just a nightmare,
she thought, getting up and stretching her back. She looked over to Ares, still sleeping soundly. She smiled, walked to her bed, and kissed her forehead. Farron was putting on the last few details on a newly erected tower. He was strapped to the wall with a series of ropes that ran through loops, all drilled into place along the entirety of the 20-foot tower. He had been up there for several hours, his arms were tired, his back sore, and his legs shaking. He was about to start his descent, but he noticed that one of the rings was loose. He took note of it and placed some resin around the wall and the ring. He had thought it would hold, but he wasn't going to risk leaving it without reporting it. He pulled a small paper out of his pocket and jotted down its location using a small amount of resin as ink. He began descending the tower, slowly letting the ropes do most of the work. One small step after another. He made it about 5 feet down when he felt the ropes begin to give. He reached out to grab the wall, but the ropes gave out under his weight. He fell 15 feet, slamming into the ground. He hit with a thud, heard his bones shatter, then blacked out. He awoke sometime later, but couldn't see a thing. He tried to speak, but instead he coughed up blood and passed out again. He then awoke to the sound of a sweet feminine voice saying words he couldn't make out. He blinked, looking around trying to see anything, but his vision was white. His ears rang and he tasted blood.
Give me the black bottle,
Syria yelled, reaching out with one hand while pressing a handful of herbs into Farron's mouth.
You need to swallow all of this, then drink this whole bottle.
She uncorked the bottle, tipped Farron's head up and pressed the bottle to his lips. He reluctantly swallowed. He began to feel numb almost instantly.
This will put you in a coma for some time. It's the only way we can heal your internal bleeding and shattered bones,
Syria said, holding his hand tight.
Just relax and let the medication take effect.
she said as Farron looked up to see a black aura around an angelic face. He tried to focus on the image, but couldn't keep his eyes open. He closed his eyes thinking about that singular image, then slipped into unconsciousness again. Syria stepped into the large hall of the chapel and sighed, looking at her white now red robes.
I should just wear red,
she thought, then began walking into her room across the hall. She took off her blood-soaked robes and tossed them into a wicker basket. She sat on her soft bed, reaching up to her hair that was tightly tied back, and removed the small string holding it up. Her light brown hair flowed to her shoulders, then she laid down. She lay there nearly naked, only her black panties covering her pelvis. She stared up at the ceiling illuminated by several flickering candles, and began to recite a small prayer in her head. Her red skin, silky smooth to the touch, began to glow with a black aura. She reached her hands up and a small black flame appeared in between them. She tossed it back and forth from one hand to the other while rolling it across her chest with each switch. She did this another 4 times before extinguishing the fire. She rolled over on her side, then looked around the room. She sat up, reaching her hand out, and pulled a shirt off of the table towards her. It floated off the table, surrounded by a black energy. She snatched it from the air, letting the aura disappear from her and the shirt, then slid it on. The small room she lived in was comfortable, but compared to her family home back in Sin's garden, it was tiny and claustrophobic. She came from a noble family. Her mother was in the Soul Delegates, a team of elven mages directly under the command of the Elven King, who oversaw the laws of the land. Her father had been the chef for the King of Meridia, and Syria picked up on many of her father's cooking quirks. Syria stood up and began walking to her desk. She stopped in her tracks after a loud knock came from her door.
Just a moment,
she called out, rushing over to her dresser, then ripped a pair of pants from the bottom drawer. She swiftly put them on and walked to the door, opening it to see Father Haith standing there. He was holding a bundle of white clothing in his hands.
I assumed you would like a new robe after the healing session,
he said, holding it out to her.
Thank you, Father,
Syria said, taking the robe into her hand. Father Haith eyed her over, looking at the outfit she put on before his arrival.
How is the young man doing?
He asked.
I gave him a dose of Haven Stem and applied a solution to help heal his bones, but he will be in need of another dose in an hour, she answered and looked towards the door across the hall.
I see. Keep an eye on the wound and let me know if things get worse,
Father Haith replied, smiled, and turned to walk away.
Oh, and Syria, please don't burn the chapel down,
he said jokingly. Syria laughed, then closed the door, taking off her shirt, pants, and underwear, threw the new robe on the bed, then lay back down. She had a feeling of loneliness wash over her for a moment, but brushed it off as she began to glow black again. She knew it was wrong to do under the roof of the gods, but she was alone now. She began running her hands over her body, using the tips of her fingers to create small embers that heated her skin. She bit her lip as her hands reached lower and lower, then she closed her eyes, succumbing to her desire.